The grand ballroom of the royal palace was magnificent beyond description. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted by master artists 3 centuries ago. Hundreds of guests in formal attire mingled beneath portraits of Valdorian royalty, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that spoke of diplomacy and old money. Marcus Rodriguez stood at the entrance to this glittering world, wearing a borrowed formal tuxedo that Chancellor Hoffman had somehow procured in his size. The tracksuit that had seemed so defiant a few hours ago now felt like a symbol of his ignorance and arrogance. "Remember," Ambassador Whitmore said quietly beside him, "complete humility. No explanations, no justifications. Simply acknowledge what you did wrong and ask for forgiveness." Marcus nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. In the octagon, he had faced men who wanted to knock him unconscious, but this was infinitely more terrifying. Here, he had to face something his pride had always protected him from, admitting he was wrong. The conversations in the ballroom gradually died as people noticed his arrival. Word of the incident had spread through the gathering like wildfire, and everyone wanted to see what the disgraced American fighter would do next. Some faces showed curiosity, others barely concealed contempt. At the far end of the ballroom, Crown Prince Alexander of Valdoria held court near the main staircase. He was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of bearing that came from a lifetime of responsibility. Unlike the pampered royal Marcus had imagined, Prince Alexander carried himself like a man accustomed to serious decisions. Captain Lindqvist stood nearby with his men, their formal dress uniforms immaculate despite the earlier confrontation. When Marcus's eyes met the captain's, he saw no anger or gloating, only a professional assessment of a potential threat. Chancellor Hoffman stepped forward and raised his hand for attention. The ballroom fell completely silent, creating a hush so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. "Your Royal Highness, distinguished guests," the Chancellor announced in his clear, formal voice, "Mr. Marcus Rodriguez has requested the opportunity to address this gathering." Prince Alexander studied Marcus for a long moment before nodding his permission. "Very well. We will hear what he has to say." Marcus walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom, every step echoing off the marble floor. He had fought in arenas filled with 20,000 screaming fans, but this walk felt longer and more intimidating than any entrance he had ever made. When he reached the middle of the room, Marcus stopped and looked around at the assembled faces. These were diplomats, business leaders, celebrities, and nobility from across Europe. Many of them had probably never heard of mixed martial arts before tonight, but they all knew what disrespect looked like. For a moment, his old pride surged back. Part of him wanted to defend his actions, to explain that he was a champion who deserved respect. But then, he remembered the feeling of consciousness slipping away in Captain Lindqvist's arms, and the humiliation of waking up on the floor in front of dozens of strangers. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "Distinguished guests, I came here tonight as a representative of my country and my sport. I have failed in both responsibilities." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. The words felt like they were being torn from his throat, but he forced himself to continue. "I showed disrespect to your culture, your traditions, and your people. I acted with arrogance and ignorance, believing that my achievements in fighting gave me the right to behave however I wanted, wherever I wanted." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. They had expected a perfunctory apology, not this level of honest self-examination. "I insulted Captain Lindqvist and his men, calling them toy soldiers and questioning their honor. These are men who have dedicated their lives to service and duty, while I have dedicated mine to my own ego. My words were not just disrespectful, they were completely wrong." Marcus turned to face Captain Lindqvist directly. "Captain, you and your men represent something I had forgotten existed. Honor without selfishness, strength without ego, duty without reward. When I attacked you, I wasn't just attacking a guard. I was attacking everything decent that I had abandoned in myself." The captain's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been surprise. He had expected excuses and justifications, not this brutal honesty. "I want everyone here to know," Marcus continued, turning back to the crowd. That Captain Lindqvist showed me mercy tonight. He could have seriously injured me, but instead he used exactly the force necessary to stop my aggression and no more. He acted with the restraint and professionalism that I completely lacked. Prince Alexander stepped forward, his royal bearing commanding absolute attention. Mr. Rodriguez, you speak of ego and arrogance. Do you understand why these qualities are so dangerous? Marcus thought carefully before answering. Your Highness, I think ego makes you believe you're more important than you actually are. It makes you forget that other people deserve respect regardless of what you've accomplished. Tonight I learned that being a champion in one area doesn't make you a champion as a person. And what do you believe you should have done differently? Everything, Marcus said without hesitation. I should have researched your culture and traditions before coming here. I should have dressed appropriately and followed proper protocol. When Chancellor Hoffman tried to brief me, I should have listened instead of dismissing him. And when Captain Lindqvist gave me a final warning, I should have apologized immediately instead of escalating the situation. The prince studied him for another long moment. You attacked a member of my royal guard while they performed their duties. In our law, this is a serious crime. What punishment do you believe you deserve? Marcus felt his throat tighten. This was the moment that would determine his future. Your Highness, I deserve whatever punishment you think is appropriate. I broke your laws and dishonored your hospitality. But I hope that my apology and my commitment to learning from this experience might earn me the chance to prove that I can be better than the man who walked into this palace tonight. The ballroom remained absolutely silent as Prince Alexander considered his words. Finally, the prince spoke. Mr. Rodriguez, you have shown us two different men tonight. The first was ruled by pride and ignorance. The second has demonstrated humility and genuine remorse. The question now is which man you will choose to be going forward. I choose to be better, Your Highness. I want to be the kind of man who honors the places he visits and the people he meets. Prince Alexander nodded slowly. Very well. Your apology is accepted. However, mere words are not sufficient to repair the damage done by your actions. Marcus's heart sank. Despite his apology, he was still going to face serious consequences. I understand, Your Highness. Therefore, the prince continued, you will remain in Valdoria for 1 month as a guest of the palace. You will study our history, our culture, and our traditions. You will train with Captain Lindqvist and his men, learning not just fighting techniques, but the discipline and honor that guide their service. At the end of that month, if you have demonstrated genuine growth and understanding, you will be free to leave with no legal consequences. Marcus stared at the prince in shock. This wasn't the punishment he had expected, but something far more challenging, the opportunity to actually become a better person. Your Highness, I accept your terms gratefully. Thank you for giving me this chance. Do not thank me yet, Prince Alexander said with a slight smile. Captain Lindqvist is a demanding instructor. You may find that a month of his training is more difficult than any fight you have ever experienced. Captain Lindqvist stepped forward and bowed slightly to his prince. Your Highness, I accept this responsibility. Mr. Rodriguez will learn what it means to serve something greater than himself. As the formal ceremony concluded and conversations gradually resumed, Marcus found himself surrounded by people who had witnessed his humiliation and redemption. Some approached with genuine respect for his honesty, others with curiosity about what would happen next. Chancellor Hoffman appeared at his elbow. Mr. Rodriguez, your quarters have been prepared. Captain Lindqvist will brief you on your training schedule tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. 6 in the morning? Marcus asked weakly. The Royal Guard begins each day with physical training at dawn. The captain said matter-of-factly. You will join them. I suspect you will find it educational. As Marcus was escorted to his new quarters, he reflected on the extraordinary events of the evening. He had arrived in Valdoria as a man drunk on his own success, convinced that his fighting skills made him superior to everyone around him. He was leaving the ballroom as a humbled student, facing a month of challenges that would test not just his physical abilities, but his character. The room he was assigned was comfortable but simple, nothing like the luxury suites he was accustomed to. As he prepared for bed, Marcus looked out the window at the palace gardens bathed in moonlight. Somewhere in this ancient building, Captain Lindqvist was probably planning training sessions designed to break down his ego and rebuild him as something better. For the first time in years, Marcus Rodriguez fell asleep thinking not about his next victory, but about what kind of man he wanted to become. The month ahead would be the hardest of his life, but also potentially the most important. His phone buzzed with another flood of messages from the outside world. The story of his downfall and attempted redemption was spreading globally, but, for once, Marcus didn't care about his public image. He had bigger concerns now, like learning to be worthy of the second chance he had been given. As dawn approached, and his first day of real training loomed, Marcus realized that this was the beginning of the most important fight of his career. Not a fight against another man, but against his own worst impulses. Not a fight for a championship belt, but for his soul. The UFC middleweight champion had been defeated in 15 seconds by a palace guard. But, perhaps, if he was willing to work for it, Marcus Rodriguez could emerge victorious in the much longer battle to become a man of genuine honor and respect. The next morning would bring pain, exhaustion, and lessons he wasn't prepared for. But it would also bring the possibility of redemption, one grueling day at a time, under the watchful eye of men who had chosen duty over glory and service over self. Marcus Rodriguez closed his eyes and prepared for the hardest month of his life, knowing it might also be the best thing that had ever happened to him. The fallen champion was about to learn what it truly meant to fight for something worthy of respect. The tension in the palace entrance hall could be cut with a knife. Marcus Rodriguez stood facing Captain Eric Lindqvist and 5 other royal guards, while dozens of elegantly dressed guests watched in horrified fascination. This was either about to be the shortest diplomatic incident in history or the most spectacular fall from grace anyone had ever witnessed. "You want to remove me?" Marcus said, rolling his shoulders and bouncing on the balls of his feet. "I'd like to see you try, tin soldier." Captain Lindqvist raised one hand, and instantly his 5 men spread out in a perfect semicircle behind Marcus. Their movement was so smooth and coordinated that it looked like a dance they had practiced 1,000 times. Which, in fact, they had. "Final warning, Mr. Rodriguez," the captain said calmly. "Apologize for your disrespect and conduct yourself appropriately, or face the consequences." Marcus looked around at the guards surrounding him and felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. This was what he lived for, the moment before a fight when everything else faded away and only combat mattered. He had been feeling restless lately, missing the pure challenge of physical confrontation. Consequences? Marcus grinned, his fighter's ego completely overriding any common sense. "Brother, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I am the consequences." Chancellor Hoffman made one last desperate attempt to prevent disaster. "Gentlemen, please. Surely we can resolve this misunderstanding without." "No misunderstanding," Marcus interrupted, never taking his eyes off Captain Lindqvist. "Your guard dog here thinks he can intimidate me. Time to show him what a real fighter looks like." Without warning, Marcus launched himself forward with the explosive power that had knocked out 12 professional fighters. His right hand shot toward Captain Lindqvist's jaw in a perfect overhand right that had ended careers and broken bones. Captain Lindqvist moved like water flowing around a stone. He tilted his head exactly 3 inches to the left, letting Marcus's fist whistle past his ear harmlessly. At the same moment, his left hand shot up to catch Marcus's wrist, while his right drove an elbow into the champion's solar plexus. The air exploded from Marcus's lungs as he doubled over, gasping. Before he could recover, Captain Lindqvist spun behind him and applied a sleeper hold that cut off blood flow to his brain with surgical precision. In 8 seconds, the UFC middleweight champion of the world was unconscious, held upright only by the captain's strong arms. The entire encounter lasted less than 15 seconds. The guests in the entrance hall stood in stunned silence. Many had expected violence, but they had anticipated a brawl, not a clinical demonstration of superior skill. Marcus Rodriguez, the man who had seemed so dangerous and unpredictable just moments before, now hung limp as a rag doll in the arms of a palace guard. "Medical assistance," Captain Lindqvist said quietly to one of his men, who immediately spoke into a concealed radio. "Guest Suite 3. Standard revival protocol." As Marcus began to regain consciousness, the captain lowered him gently to the marble floor and stepped back. The champion's eyes opened slowly, confusion and embarrassment replacing the arrogance that had been there moments before. What happened? Marcus mumbled, trying to sit up and failing on his first attempt. You were briefly unconscious, Captain Lindqvist said matter-of-factly. A result of restricted blood flow to your brain. You will feel dizzy for several minutes, but there is no permanent damage. Marcus's memory came flooding back, along with the horrible realization that he had been defeated in front of dozens of witnesses. Worse, he had been defeated easily, effortlessly, by a man who wasn't even breathing hard. That's impossible, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. I'm the champion. I'm undefeated in 3 years. In your sport, perhaps, Captain Lindqvist said without mockery or cruelty. But this is not your sport, Mr. Rodriguez. This is our country, our palace, and our duty. A palace physician arrived within minutes, a distinguished older woman who examined Marcus with professional efficiency. Mild disorientation, slightly elevated heart rate. She reported to the captain. He will be fine within the hour. As Marcus struggled to his feet with the doctor's help, he found himself looking at the royal guards with new eyes. These weren't ceremonial soldiers or palace decorations. They were warriors who had trained their entire adult lives for one purpose: protecting the royal family from any threat, including arrogant foreign fighters who forgot their place. Chancellor Hoffman approached cautiously. The diplomatic crisis he had feared was now a reality, but perhaps it could still be contained. Mr. Rodriguez, I suggest we escort you to a private room where you can recover and reconsider your approach to this evening's festivities. But Marcus's humiliation was far from over. Word of the incident had already begun to spread through the palace's vast network of staff, guests, and security personnel. Within minutes, everyone in the building knew that the famous UFC champion had been neutralized by a single royal guard in less than 20 seconds. As they helped Marcus toward the guest suites, he passed groups of other visitors who whispered behind their hands and stared at him with mixtures of curiosity and contempt. The man who had arrived expecting to be treated like royalty himself was now a walking joke, living proof that real power couldn't be won in a cage. Guest Suite 3 was elegantly appointed, but clearly designed for diplomatic isolation. Heavy curtains blocked the windows, and Marcus noticed that while the door had no visible lock, 2 guards had taken positions in the hallway outside. He wasn't technically under arrest, but he certainly wasn't free to roam the palace. His entourage had been escorted to a separate room, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts for the first time in years. Without the constant validation of fans, trainers, and hangers-on, he was forced to confront what had just happened. He had been beaten, not defeated in a close fight or caught by a lucky punch, but systematically and completely dominated by a man who made it look effortless. Worse, that man had shown him mercy, using just enough force to neutralize the threat without causing serious injury. Marcus walked to the window and stared out at the palace gardens, where other guests continued to arrive for the Crown Prince's birthday celebration. Somewhere in this building, the prince himself was probably being briefed on the incident. The man Marcus had planned to treat as an equal was now hearing about how his American guest had been subdued like a common criminal. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Chancellor Hoffman entered, followed by a woman Marcus didn't recognize. She was middle-aged, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the kind of authority that came from years of handling difficult situations. Mr. Rodriguez, the Chancellor said formally, this is Ambassador Patricia Whitmore, representing the United States Embassy. She has been briefed on tonight's incident. Ambassador Whitmore studied Marcus with sharp eyes that missed nothing. At 53, she had spent her career managing international relations and cleaning up messes made by visiting Americans. This particular mess had the potential to become a major diplomatic embarrassment. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm here to help you understand the gravity of your situation, she said, taking a seat across from him. You're not under arrest, but you are being detained pending a decision by the royal family about how to proceed. Proceed with what? Marcus asked, though he was beginning to understand that his problems were much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. You physically attacked a member of the royal guard while they were performing their duties. Ambassador Whitmore explained patiently. In Valdoria, that is considered an act of aggression against the crown itself. The penalties can be quite severe. For the first time since arriving in Valdoria, Marcus felt genuine fear. He had been so focused on his own ego that he had never considered the legal consequences of his actions. What kind of penalties? Chancellor Hoffman opened a thick leather folder and consulted several documents. Under Valdorian law, assault on a royal guard can result in imprisonment of up to 5 years, substantial fines, and permanent banishment from the kingdom. However, these are maximum sentences. The actual punishment depends on the circumstances and the wishes of the crown. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. 5 years in prison? His career would be over. His endorsement deals would disappear. Everything he had worked for would be destroyed because of 15 seconds of stupidity and pride. There has to be something I can do, he said desperately. Some way to fix this. Ambassador Whitmore leaned forward. There is one possibility, but it would require you to do something I suspect will be very difficult for your personality. You would need to show genuine humility and respect. How do you mean? Chancellor Hoffman explained the ancient tradition of formal apology in Valdorian culture. If you were to make a public acknowledgement of your wrongdoing, accept responsibility for your actions, and ask forgiveness from those you have offended, the royal family might consider a more lenient response. A public apology? Marcus's pride immediately rebelled against the idea. In front of all those people? That would ruin my reputation. Mr. Rodriguez, Ambassador Whitmore said sharply, your reputation is already ruined. Videos of your defeat are probably being uploaded to social media as we speak. Your only choice now is whether you want to be remembered as an arrogant fool or as a man who learned from his mistakes. As if summoned by her words, Marcus's phone began buzzing with notifications. His social media manager, his promoter, and journalists from around the world were all trying to reach him. The story was already going viral. UFC champion humiliated by palace guard. Marcus looked at the phone in horror, watching as his carefully constructed image crumbled in real time. The man who had thought himself untouchable was learning that in the modern world, shame traveled at the speed of light. What exactly would this apology involve? He asked quietly. Chancellor Hoffman consulted his notes again. You would need to appear before the assembled guests, acknowledge your disrespectful behavior, apologize to Captain Lindqvist and his men, and ask forgiveness from His Royal Highness. The apology must be sincere and complete. And if I do this, what happens then? That would be entirely up to the royal family, the Chancellor replied. But, historically, genuine expressions of remorse have been met with mercy. Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, weighing his options. He could refuse to apologize and face the full legal consequences of his actions. He could try to flee the country and spend the rest of his life as an international fugitive. Or he could swallow his pride and beg forgiveness from the people he had insulted. None of these options appealed to him, but one was clearly better than the others. If I agree to this apology, he said finally, I want guarantees. No prison time, no permanent banishment. I apologize, and then I go home. Ambassador Whitmore shook her head. You're not in a position to negotiate terms, Mr. Rodriguez. You can apologize and hope for mercy, or you can face the consequences of your actions. Those are your only choices. The room fell silent again. Outside, Marcus could hear the sounds of the birthday celebration continuing without him. Guests were laughing, music was playing, and life was moving on as if his humiliation had never happened. But, for Marcus Rodriguez, everything had changed. The man who had never backed down from a fight was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong. As the evening wore on and the weight of his situation became clear, Marcus began to understand that this night would define the rest of his life. He could emerge as a better man who had learned from his mistakes, or he could let his pride destroy everything he had worked to achieve. The choice was his, but time was running out. The birthday celebration was reaching its peak, and soon he would have to face the music. In a few hours, Marcus Rodriguez would either find the courage to humble himself before the world or watch his career and reputation die in the elegant halls of a palace that had seen the rise and fall of countless proud men throughout history. The clock was ticking, and Redemption waited for no one. Marcus "Thunder" Rodriguez had everything a man could want at 28 years old. The UFC middleweight championship belt sat proudly in his penthouse apartment overlooking Las Vegas. Endorsement deals worth millions filled his bank account. Women threw themselves at him wherever he went. Fame followed him like a shadow. But success had changed Marcus in ways he didn't recognize. The humble kid from East Los Angeles who once worked 3 jobs to pay for gym membership was gone. In his place stood a man drunk on his own power, convinced that his fists could solve any problem and his fame could open any door. The invitation arrived on expensive cream-colored paper with gold trim. The Royal Embassy of Valdoria cordially requested his presence at the Crown Prince's birthday celebration. Valdoria was a small but wealthy European nation, famous for its ancient traditions and strict protocols. Marcus barely glanced at the formal dress code requirements before tossing the invitation aside. Another fancy party where rich people pretend to be important, he told his manager, Tony Castellanos, during their morning meeting. But the appearance fee is good, so I'll show up and smile for a few photos. Tony shifted uncomfortably in his chair. At 55, he had managed fighters for over 2 decades and knew when trouble was brewing. Marcus, this isn't just any party. Valdorian royalty takes protocol seriously. Maybe we should hire an etiquette consultant to brief you on etiquette consultant? Marcus laughed, flexing his tattooed arms. Tony, I'm the champion of the world. These people should feel honored that I'm gracing their little party with my presence. I don't need to learn how to bow and scrape for some prince who's never worked a day in his life. The gym fell silent as Marcus continued his rant. Other fighters stopped their training to listen, some shaking their heads at their champion's arrogance. Marcus had always been confident, but lately, that confidence had curdled into something uglier. 3 days before the event, Marcus received a detailed protocol briefing from the Valdorian embassy. The document outlined proper greeting procedures, dress requirements, behavior expectations, and the sacred traditions surrounding the royal guard. Marcus skimmed the first page and threw the rest in the trash. Bunch of medieval nonsense, he muttered to his girlfriend, Sophia, as she watched him practice combinations on the heavy bag. I'm going to wear whatever I want and act however I want. What are they going to do, arrest me? Sophia, a former ring girl who had genuinely fallen for Marcus before fame changed him, tried one more time to reach the man she once loved. Baby, maybe you should read those papers. This is different from your usual club appearances. These people have real power, real history. Show them some respect. Marcus stopped punching and turned to face her, sweat dripping from his forehead. Respect? Sophia, I am respect. I've earned everything I have with these hands. I've bled and broken bones to get here. Some prince who inherited his position because of lucky genetics doesn't deserve anything from me. The conversation ended there, but Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the gym's air conditioning. She had seen this pattern before with other fighters who let success poison their souls. Pride always came before the fall. On the day of departure, Marcus chose his outfit with deliberate defiance. Instead of the required formal evening wear, he selected a flashy designer tracksuit covered in gold chains. His entourage tried to convince him to change, but Marcus was beyond reason. They invited Marcus Rodriguez, the UFC champion. He declared as they boarded his private jet. That's exactly who they're getting. The flight to Valdoria took 8 hours. Marcus spent most of it drinking expensive whiskey and trash-talking European fighters he had defeated. His social media manager cringed as Marcus posted increasingly arrogant videos, claiming he was about to show these royals how a real man behaves. Valdoria's capital city, Kronsberg, was a masterpiece of medieval architecture mixed with modern luxury. Ancient stone buildings stood alongside gleaming skyscrapers. The royal palace dominated the city center, its towers reaching toward cloudy skies like fingers of history itself. As their motorcade approached the palace gates, Marcus felt a momentary flicker of unease. The building was massive, older than his entire country, radiating an authority that came from centuries of unbroken tradition. Royal guards in ceremonial uniforms stood at attention, their faces hidden beneath polished helmets. Impressive pile of rocks, Marcus said, trying to mask his sudden nervousness with bravado. But it's cold as hell inside. The palace doors were 15 feet tall, carved from ancient oak and bound with iron. As they swung open, Marcus stepped into another world. The entrance hall stretched higher than a cathedral, lined with portraits of kings and queens going back 40 generations. Chandeliers worth more than most people's houses cast warm light over marble floors that had been walked by emperors and presidents. Despite himself, Marcus felt small. A man in an impeccable black suit approached their group. He was tall, thin, and moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to serving power. "Mr. Rodriguez, welcome to Valdoria. I am Chancellor Hoffman, Chief of Royal Protocol. His Royal Highness is eager to meet you." Marcus barely acknowledged the greeting, instead staring around the hall like a tourist. Other guests moved through the space with quiet confidence, their formal wear and dignified bearing making Marcus's tracksuit look even more inappropriate. "Where's the bar?" Marcus asked loudly, his voice echoing off the ancient walls. Chancellor Hoffman's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Refreshments are being served in the Crimson Drawing Room. However, I must first review the evening's protocol with you. There are certain traditions." "Look, pal," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer to the older man. "I didn't fly across the ocean to get a lecture about traditions. Just point me toward the prince so I can shake his hand and get this over with." Several nearby guests turned to stare. In Valdoria, raising one's voice in the royal palace was considered deeply disrespectful. Chancellor Hoffman's assistant whispered urgently in his ear, clearly suggesting they remove this crude American before he could embarrass himself further. But the Chancellor had dealt with difficult guests before. His job was to maintain royal dignity while navigating the egos of visiting dignitaries. "Of course, Mr. Rodriguez. Perhaps we could simply discuss the greeting protocol. When meeting His Royal Highness, tradition requires nothing from me," Marcus said, his voice growing louder. "I'm Marcus Rodriguez. I'm the UFC middleweight champion of the world. I've never bowed to anyone in my life, and I'm not starting now." The entrance hall had gone completely quiet. Guests pretended to admire paintings while straining to hear every word. Palace staff exchanged worried glances. This level of disrespect was unprecedented. Chancellor Hoffman's training took over. His voice remained calm and professional, but those who knew him could see the steel beneath his diplomatic smile. "I understand, Mr. Rodriguez. However, you are now a guest in the royal palace of Valdoria. Certain behaviors are expected. Expected by who?" Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and grating in the elegant space. "Listen, I came here as a favor. Your prince should be grateful I showed up at all. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not just to make him feel special." At that moment, a side door opened, and 6 men entered the hall. They moved in perfect synchronization, their footsteps silent despite their military boots. These were members of the Royal Guard, the elite unit responsible for protecting the royal family. The Royal Guard of Valdoria was not ceremonial. These men were selected from the nation's best soldiers, trained in hand-to-hand combat, weapons, and tactics that traced their lineage back to medieval knights. They had protected kings in times of war and peace, and they took their duty seriously. Captain Eric Lindqvist led the group. At 35, he had served in the Guard for 12 years, earning his position through skill, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to royal protocol. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Unlike many palace staff, he had no patience for difficult guests who showed disrespect to his sovereign. "Chancellor," Captain Lindqvist said quietly, his English accented but precise. "Is there a problem here?" Marcus sized up the 6 guards and felt his fighter's instincts kick in. They looked tough, but he had faced bigger men in the octagon. More importantly, he sensed an opportunity to establish dominance. In his twisted thinking, backing down now would make him look weak. "No problem at all," Marcus said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just explaining to your boss here that I don't jump through hoops for anyone, not even for toy soldiers playing dress-up." Captain Lindqvist's expression didn't change, but the other guards shifted almost imperceptibly. In Valdoria, the Royal Guard commanded immense respect. Citizens bowed when they passed. Foreign dignitaries treated them with careful courtesy. No one had ever called them toy soldiers to their faces. Mr. Rodriguez, Chancellor Hoffman said quickly, sensing the dangerous shift in atmosphere. Perhaps we should postpone your introduction to His Royal Highness until what? Marcus interrupted. Until I pretend to be impressed by these museum pieces? He gestured dismissively at the guards. I've fought real warriors. Men who earned their positions through blood and sweat, not birthright and ceremonies. The words hung in the air like poison. In the absolute silence that followed, Marcus felt a moment of doubt. Something in Captain Lindqvist's eyes suggested that this situation was spiraling beyond his control. But Marcus Rodriguez had never backed down from a fight in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. His pride, his arrogance, and his complete ignorance of Valdorian culture were about to collide with centuries of tradition and honor. What happened next would change everything. Captain Lindqvist stepped forward, his movements controlled and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that came from protecting royalty for over a decade. Mr. Rodriguez, you are a guest in our nation and in this palace. You will show proper respect, or you will be removed. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. Removed? By who you? He looked around the hall at the shocked faces of other guests. This should be interesting. The UFC champion had no idea that he was about to learn a lesson that would humble him in ways he never imagined possible. His fists had made him famous and rich, but they were about to meet something they couldn't defeat: honor, tradition, and men who had dedicated their lives to something greater than themselves. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legend in both the fighting world and the halls of European royalty. Marcus Rodriguez, drunk on his own power, was about to discover that there were some lines that should never be crossed, and some people who would never allow disrespect to go unanswered. The ancient palace walls had witnessed many dramatic moments throughout history, but what was about to unfold would be remembered long after the current generation had passed into memory. Pride was about to meet its match, and the consequences would reach far beyond one man's ego. As Captain Lindqvist and his guards prepared to defend the honor of their prince and their nation, Marcus Rodriguez flexed his fists and prepared for what he thought would be just another easy victory. He had no idea that he was about to face the most important fight of his life, one where winning and losing would be measured by something far more valuable than championship belts or prize money. The battle for respect was about to begin.